or after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." That's my slides up. Oh, I went backwards. Gosh, I'm having a day, so I apologize. Here we go, verse 16. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head." Remember, he told the cupbearer he'll lift up your head. The baker, he says, he'll lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. And he lifted up the heads of his chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. May God bless the reading of his word. By the way, after this last sentence here in that chapter, there's going to be 2 years that pass before the story picks back up. 2 years. And it's 2 years of silence. There's 2 years of sort of nothingness, that we don't have any idea what's going on, other than Joseph is still in prison for that 2 years. We're going to sit in this chapter today, which I think is part of the reason there's that time. As we read this, it doesn't just flow from one thing to the next. We have to sometimes sit in the mess that we're in. We have to sometimes sit in the situation that we find ourselves in. There's not immediate relief. And that's true for Joseph. It's true for us. And so most of us know what it feels like to serve faithfully and then watch the help we need sort of walk out the door and never look back. You know, we've all got gifts and talents and abilities. If we're Christians, you have spiritual gifts. God can use that giftedness even in prison, even in that difficult time, even in the hardship. And even in that time, He's still working out His good purposes when others forget us completely. And it's easy for us to forget that sometimes. As you're walking through hardship in life, God is still at work. He is still using you. You can still serve Him effectively, even when it's hard. So, at the beginning of the chapter, Joseph has made it. He's in this prison. We don't know how long he's been there. And 2 of Pharaoh's highest officials. Now, we don't think about the cupbearer, sort of the chief butler, chief waiter, and chief baker being his highest officials. But the king, one of his big jobs was to entertain. It was to host, and it was to be the ambassador for his name. Like, he welcomed in people, right? And it was to keep things moving there. And you needed a good cupbearer, and you needed a good baker, right? And so these were 2 of his top officials. And so we don't know what they did exactly, but they offended the Pharaoh, the king, in some way, and he threw them into prison. It happened to be the same prison where Joseph was being held. And while we don't know what their offense was specifically, we do know specifically who it is that takes responsibility for them. Verse 4 tells us the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. He was sort of their supervisor in prison. Now, let that sit for just a second, right? Joseph is a prisoner. He's not a guard, he's not an officer, he's not an administrator, he's not an official. He's a prisoner. He's been falsely accused. He doesn't have any legal standing, and he doesn't have any path to release. And yet, in this mess he's in, he's been assigned these two prisoners. He's in charge of them. He's responsible for them. Now, I'll tell you, I don't think this is an accident. I think Joseph has built this reputation inside the prison the same way he built this reputation inside Potiphar's house. It was through quiet, consistent faithfulness. Listen, this is how God elevates his people. This is how God chooses to use us. Like he doesn't look for the flashy. He can use the flashy. God can use anybody he wants to use, and he does. But I really believe that the person that God calls is the person who's already doing the work. It's the person who's already in the trenches. I'll illustrate this a little bit with something I'm involved in, is with our Texas State Association of Free Will Baptists. Texas Free Will Baptists. One of the things I do in my role as our general director for the association is I plan the state meeting. We just had our state meeting just about a month ago exactly. And I felt like it went really, really well. And for years and years, and there are some other associations in our denomination that do this, for years and years, we would invite, to be our main speaker, we would invite, some department head, head of our missions or church planting or college, whatever, right? We'd invite department head, and that's fine. Like I'm not devaluing that in the least. Many of those folks are good friends, and so it's an honor to have them with us. But I really felt a conviction that one of the purposes of our meeting ought to be to encourage and train and teach and lift up our everyday, day in, day out pastors and lay members around the state of Texas, right? Like not just some encouraging, cheer speech, right? And again, that's not all that these guys did. But I wanted to start having themes that we could relate and that would help us. And I wanted to bring in speakers who were doing the work of those themes, right? And so if we're going to talk about, we had several years ago, our theme had to do with cross-cultural ministry and the fact that we have so many folks from around the world who move to the state of Texas. And so how can we reach the nations by reaching our neighbors? And so we reached out to my friend Farron Tebow, who's pastoring a multicultural church plant in a college town in Missouri, and his church is about a third, if I remember right, international students. Like he's doing the work, right? And so I wanted somebody who didn't just know it in theory, I wanted somebody who's doing the work. We wanted to talk about worship and the worship ministry of the church and what does it look like to worship and all of those things. So I reached out to Daniel Webster, who leads worship in his local congregation, who teaches it in one of our colleges, and who is working on it in his educational process. He's working on a PhD in church worship, right? And so I wanted to get folks who were doing the work, and that's exactly what's happening here. God is using Joseph. Why? Because every day, in quiet obedience, he's doing the work. He's doing the work. He's doing the work. And God gives him a platform because of that. And God uses him. And God gives him a good reputation. And God allows him to accomplish incredibly large things because he's doing small things consistently and in obedience. And so that's what I want to tell you, right? We need to be doing the small things consistently in obedience. And God will use that in time to accomplish great things. Nobody appointed Joseph to oversee these men because he complained well, or because Joseph had connections. He didn't have connections, and he wasn't a complainer. He had character. And he displayed that character every day in a place where really nobody's watching, but God saw it. God used him. And then there's this short little sentence that comes after this, right? It's almost like a throwaway sentence, but I don't think it's that. I think it's more important than that. It says that after they had been in custody for some time. In other words, the story slows down. Let this sit for a moment. We don't know how long, but we're told this doesn't happen quickly, right? Again, Joseph is waiting. He's being obedient. He's doing the thing, and it just takes time. Let me ask you, right? You can cook a meal. You can cook a meal in a microwave. You can. Or you can cook a meal in a crock pot or slowly in the oven, right? You can. Which is going to produce the better meal? Like if you want a tender piece of meat, right? You can cook it in the microwave. But you will not get a tender, juicy piece of meat. You will get something that it will meet your nutritional needs in a technical way. But that's really about it, right? If you want to enjoy it, if you want it to be successful in it, if you want it to be like what it's supposed to be, you can't do it quickly. And that's what's happening here. Things slow down. We don't know how much time it takes, but Joseph has to kind of sit in this prison with these guys and demonstrate his faithfulness. He attends to them. He is in charge of them. He's responsible for them. And even though they are high-ranking officials, they're in the exact same boat he's in. And so both of these men have a dream. And they have the dream on the same night. Each dream has its own meaning. And Joseph comes to them. This is important. He notices something. He notices that they were dejected. And he asked them about it. He asked them, "Why do you look so sad today?" This tells us a lot about Joseph and his character. This one little exchange. There's a lot going on here. He has every reason to be absorbed in his own situation and in his own difficulty and in his own pain. He had been sold into slavery by his own brothers. He was falsely accused of infidelity with his master's wife. He's sitting in a prison for a crime he didn't commit. All of those things, right? If anybody had an excuse to be self-consumed in his own problems, it's Joseph. But he wasn't. He notices what's going on around him. He asks. He's concerned. In the middle of his own pain, Joseph makes space for somebody else's pain. There's a Christian writer, sort of a bit of a mystic, Henry Nouwen. He wrote what he called the wonderful healer, the wounded healer, rather. He talked about how ministry often flows out of the very wounds we carry instead of in spite of the wounds we carry. See, we think, I've suffered this pain and difficulty, I can't help others. But he observes, and I think Scripture confirms this, it's often because of that wound we carry, that pain we carry, that we're most able to help others. You know, we've had grief share groups here in the past, and that's a wonderful example of that, right? It is people who have experienced that pain of loss who are often most able to help others who've experienced that pain of loss. It's not somebody whose life has gone well and they all have it all together that's most helpful. It's that person who has been broken and who's been hurt and who can walk with you through that. Joseph's attentiveness is not in spite of his own suffering. In fact, I think his attentiveness is probably shaped by his own suffering. He's allowed God to use that. And so when these two officials explain that they've had these dreams and nobody can interpret them, Joseph responds to them and it tells us a lot about what he believes. He said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Now, listen, here's what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, hey, I have a gift. Let me show you what I can do. He doesn't show off. He doesn't brag. He doesn't build himself up. He doesn't use this to kind of negotiate his own situation. And if I do this thing for you, like, he doesn't manipulate it. He points to God as the source. Do not all interpretations belong to God. And then he just makes himself available. And so whatever Joseph's gift is, whatever gift he carries, he understands that his gift is something on loan from God, and it's given to him to be used for others. It's not given to him to be used like a currency that he can spend on himself. He doesn't use it to build himself up. That's what spiritual gifts are given to us for, by the way. Paul makes that very clear, that it's for the good of the church. Whatever gifts I have or whatever gifts you have, those are not for you. And you may derive some benefit from them. I'm not arguing that, but they're not for you. Your gifts are for the church. The reason gifts are for the church is because ultimately they're for the world. They're for the kingdom, to build the kingdom. So if you're using your gifts for your own benefit, you're not using them right. You're abusing them. So then Joseph tells him, tell me your dreams. So the cupbearer goes first. He describes it's fine. It's got these branches. They bud, they blossom, they ripen. Grapes grow. And he takes the grapes and he presses them into Pharaoh's cup, and he places the cup in Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph, without blinking an eye, he just, within 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift you up. He's going to restore you to your position. And that's the interpretation of the cupbearer's dream. But Joseph, while he doesn't use his gifts to negotiate a place for himself, he does make a request. And I think it's worth defending Joseph's request. I don't think we should just read past it. He says, when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. And he tells why. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. So this isn't, by the way, this isn't Joseph not having faith in God to provide for him. This is Joseph seeing an opportunity that God may work through and provide for him. He's not abandoning his trust. He's pursuing a legitimate, available means of justice. When we began our service and we prayed, and I prayed about us as a country and about the way we interact with our own freedoms and things, I think this is something to bear in mind. I think this is an application of this. As we have just spent this week celebrating our nation's independence and our rights as citizens, our freedoms as citizens, it is permissible to avail yourself of the rights provided within the system you find yourself in. Now, we don't abuse that, and we don't manipulate that, and we don't beat people over the head with those rights. And part of being a mature Christian is the willingness to give up rights for the good of others, right? And so, but it is absolutely permissible. It's what Joseph does. He has the right to ask this guy, remember me. And when you go before Pharaoh and you have the ear of Pharaoh and he will listen to you, here's what I need you to ask him for. And that's okay for us to do. Like, we have a judicial system, we have a court system, we have a constitution, we have laws at every level of government. Avail yourself of those, as any citizen of our city, state, nation is allowed to do that. But we don't do it just for our own benefit. We do it for the glory of God. Joseph has been wronged again and again. He's wronged by his brothers. He's wronged by this false accusation. He's doing what any reasonable person in his position would do. He's asking someone who's about to have access to the most powerful man in Egypt, maybe one of the most powerful men in the world. He wants him to hear his case. And so that's an okay thing to do. He just states the truth of his situation, asks to be remembered. Then we get to the baker. And so the baker hears all of this go on with the cupbearer, and he says, okay, all right, this is good news. Let me share my dream. And he shares his dream. 3 baskets of bread stacked on his head. There's birds eating the contents out of the top basket. Joseph does not soften the truth in this interpretation. says, in 3 days, Pharaoh's going to lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh. He's not hedging. He's not slow rolling this. He's not soft pedaling this. He just tells them the truth. And I think it's important that he just tells truth as God's shown it to him. Now, he's not being intentionally mean. Like, he didn't drag up things about the baker's character or what crime he might have committed or whatever else. He just tells him, this is what God tells me this dream means. And I think when we interact with people, it's important to remember that we have to tell the truth. We have to tell the real truth. Now again, we don't have to drag up things to make it meaner than it is. The truth is hard. Sometimes it's very hard. But we can say it with love and compassion. You don't get the sense that Joseph's being mean here. In fact, I kind of get the sense, if you look at Joseph's total character and the things we've learned about him, I kind of get the sense that maybe he tells him this with a bit of a tear in his eye. Like, he tells him this with a soft heart. He tells him this in a way that says, I'm really sorry this is happening to you, but here's what's going to happen. And that's an okay thing. Be compassionate with people, but tell the truth. Be loving and be kind, but loving and kind means we tell the truth, just as God's given it to us. And this matters more than it appears at first. See, Joseph's just delivered this wonderful news to one, and it would be tempting to be soft and not tell the full truth with the second one. So that's just not fair. That's uncomfortable. But he doesn't do that. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writing about the cost of genuine community in his book Life Together, he insisted that real fellowship requires speaking the truth, even when comfortable illusion would be easier to offer. Because a community sustained by pleasant fictions is not actually sustained at all. If you and I are friends, and I don't tell you the truth, how much of a friend am I? How much of a community are we? If we're not honest with each other, we're not building each other up. We're not really being helpful. Joseph's faithfulness to the truth, and even though this truth was unwelcome and it was hard, Joseph's faithfulness to the truth is part of what makes him a trustworthy servant. A man who tells you only what you want to hear hasn't told you anything you can rely on. So on the third day, and it's Pharaoh's birthday, both of these interpretations come true for both the cupbearer and the baker. And they come true exactly like Joseph said they would. The cupbearer is restored to his position. The baker is executed, just like Joseph said he would be. Joseph's gift is not in question, and his accuracy is not in question. The next thing that happens, the next part of the chapter, it demands our attention. We need to really hear this. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Now listen, I don't want to overdo it. It doesn't say the chief cupbearer, it doesn't say that he was too busy. It doesn't say the chief cupbearer found himself in a circumstance where he wasn't able to talk to Pharaoh. It doesn't say the chief cupbearer got scared, or that the chief cupbearer meant to remember, but the moment never came up. It says it very plainly that he forgot. Now, here's the thing about forgetting. We think that forgetting just happens. But I think for most people, in most circumstances, forgetting doesn't just happen. We choose to forget, or rather we don't choose to remember. Now, I'm not saying that this cupbearer went in saying, no, I'm not going to tell him. See, that would be remembering and not telling him. I think he made the conscious decision that I'm going to think about other things. I'm going to focus on these things, and everything else fades away. And so the cupbearer forgot. This was a choice. It was an unconscious choice perhaps, but it was still a choice. It was made by a man who once sat in a prison cell, and he bore the weight of dread, and he had every reason to remember the person who lifted that weight from him. How could he possibly forget? The man was effectively on death row in prison. And he was lifted up, and it had been foretold through this dream by Joseph. How on earth could he have forgotten that? And the only thing that had been asked of him is, hey, will you remember and tell Pharaoh about me? Now, it's easy to kind of rush through this. The passage doesn't rush through it, because 2 years later, Joseph's still in prison. 2 years later, he's still holding out hope. Joseph's still being disappointed day after day that nothing's changed, while the cupbearer chose to forget. I think Joseph's hope was real. I think Joseph's disappointment was real as well. This waiting time is not explained, it's not softened. I think this is what it means that Scripture is honest with us. God's providence is working behind the scenes and under the surface. It's not visible from inside it. Joseph can't see, why did the cupbearer forget? What's God doing through this? What's happening in my life or in his? Where's this headed? Like, we don't have any of that. Joseph can't see it. And that prison door closed, it was just a normal day in prison. But he doesn't know that 2 years later that Pharaoh is going to be desperate and need somebody who has exactly his gifts and exactly his abilities. And his time will come. But he can't see any of that coming. All he can do is that thing he's been doing all along. Quiet, everyday faithfulness. Quiet, everyday obedience. Just going along, doing the right thing. There's a thread, I think, that runs through all of this. And I think we need to sort of call out this thread, because I think it touches on the heart of what it means to trust God honestly, not just, I'll say, performatively, right? Like, performatively, we look like we're trusting God. We're going through the motions of trusting God, but we may not really be trusting Him, right? Everybody ever done that in your life? I'll put my hand up first, right? It looks good to those around me, but my heart's not really in it. But this is, I'm talking about what it means to really trust God deeply. And here's this truth, is that Joseph's not in control of whether the cupbearer remembers him or not. And you're not in control about the way people interact with you, whether they remember you or not. And that difficulty you're in, you're just in it. Like, you're not in charge of everything else around you. You can't be, and you can't bear that burden. You live faithfully in the moment you're in the place you're in. Joseph couldn't engineer his outcome. He couldn't force gratitude. He couldn't manufacture loyalty in this other guy's heart. Here's what Joseph could control. He couldn't control the cupbearer. He could control his own faithfulness. How did he do that? He noticed the sad faces. He offered the truth. He refused to manipulate the moment for his personal gain. He told the hard interpretation as clearly as he did the easy one. Joseph's choices were his own, and he did this in quiet, everyday faithfulness to the God who had been with him this whole way. Let me wrap this up, sharing 3 things for you to take home with you. First, serve faithfully in the place God has put you, even when you can't see why you're there. I don't know why you're going through what you're going through, whatever it is, right? I don't know why I'm going through what I go through sometimes. But that's where God has placed me, or at the very least allowed me to be. Serve faithfully there. He won't leave you there. He will relieve that. Now, it may not look what you think it ought to look like, and it may not feel what you think it ought to feel like, but God will grow you, and He will mature you, and He will give you opportunity to serve faithfully where you are. Joseph didn't know that attending to these 2 strangers that this scene would be remembered and recounted 2 years later when he needed it most, when God needed him in that position. He just served well because that's what faithfulness does. The second thing to leave you with. So first, serve faithfully. Wherever God's put you, serve faithfully. Second, be present to the pain of people around you, even in the middle of your own pain. We go through hardship and we go through difficulty. Some of you have gone through that recently. Some of you have got it on your horizon and you can see it coming. And we've all gone through it at one time or another, whatever that looks like, right? It's the death of a loved one. It's the loss of a job. It's a physical injury. It's a financial crisis. Whatever it is, right? We've all faced some version of this. But while Joseph was going through this, he looked up and saw these two sad faces. And he's got his own grief to deal with. But he saw them, and he cared. Attentiveness to others is not a luxury reserved for people whose own lives are settled and comfortable. Attentiveness to others is a gift that's available to you right now, wherever you are. Be present to the pain of others, even while you're in your own pain. It doesn't mean denying your own pain. It means letting God use your pain to help someone through theirs. Here's the third thing. If you've been forgotten by someone who could have helped you, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's a employer, a family member, a neighbor, whatever it is, if you've been forgotten by someone who could have helped you, who said they would remember and then did not remember, bring that pain honestly to God. Don't bury it. Own it. I think God sees that in Joseph, and God honors that in Joseph. God's not surprised by it. And unlike the cupbearer, God hasn't forgotten you. God was quietly at work underneath the surface and behind the scenes of the story in Joseph's life. And he's going to bring him to a place that from right here in this moment is unimaginable. It's unimaginable. And we're going to see that soon. You may not be able to see it yet. You may not be able to see your way out of this yet. Joseph couldn't either. That didn't make it any less true. So if you've been forgotten by someone, don't bury the pain. You know, pain is not something God's not familiar with. Don't forget that God gave His own Son for us. He has experienced pain. Now, we don't understand what pain would be like for God. I don't pretend to know what that would feel like. But I know that He experienced it. We know that as Jesus is on the cross, God turned His back on Him, figuratively speaking. God had to create distance between Himself and His Son, who bore our sin. And as He bore our sin, He took our sins on His own back, on the cross, so that we could be redeemed, and so that we could live in fellowship with Him and with one another. And we honor and commemorate and even celebrate that when we receive communion. When we take the bread and the cup that symbolize the broken body and the shed blood of Jesus Christ given for us. The reason Joseph was able to live in quiet faithfulness was because of his confidence that God was with him. We saw that last week, over and over in chapter 39. And the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord is with you. One of the ways He demonstrated that is when He sent His Son, Emmanuel, God with us. And then Jesus further demonstrated that by giving Himself for us. So we're going to take a moment as we prepare to close our service by receiving communion together. And you know our pattern and our habit. There are 2 cups. You take a cup with bread. You take a cup with juice, representing the body and the blood of Christ. And you hold those, and we'll come back together and receive them together. I'm going to pray and ask God's blessing on these elements. We'll have a moment of silence and allow you to pray and ask forgiveness for anything that may be between you and God, or maybe a commitment you need to make something right with somebody else that you're in conflict with. I want to give you a chance to get those kinds of things straightened out in your heart. And then we'll pass these out. You hold them and we'll partake together. So if you bow your heads with me, have a moment of silence. You pray, and then we'll pray together and ask God's blessing on your lives. God, thank you for the sacrifice that was made for us. And thank you that because of that we can live reunited with you and fellowship restored with one another. God, I pray that's what we would do. I pray that you would take these lessons from the life of Joseph today and his time in the prison and his time with the cupbearer and with the baker. And you would help us to live out the life you called us to live. Again, in fellowship with you and in fellowship with one another. Help us to recognize our gifts and to use our gifts for the benefit of one another. God, help us in humility to take these elements today. And as we do, to remember the price that was paid for our very salvation. We ask it in Jesus' name.